All right, welcome into the Minnesota High School Football Network podcast. I'm fired up for this one. This is what we've been waiting for. We wait for the whole off season, and then we finally get to watch some games. We're heading into week one of the regular season. I asked my old coach, Coach Wilkie, to join me because I like to have guests that know more than me, and he definitely does. So, Coach, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I don't know if I know more than you. Everything is topic based, right? There's knowledge about certain things that matter more than others. But I'm humbled to be here and looking forward to talking some ball. And there's nothing better than Minnesota high school football, if you ask me. So let's see what we got.
I'm excited. So what we're gonna do today is we're basically gonna go through the power rankings that I released, and I asked him just to get ready to poke holes to basically give his opinion on mine. The fun thing about Minnesota high school football, or just high school football in general, is the preseason power rankings are like especially tough to come up with just because of the amount of turnover that actually does happen in high school football. And it's some research. It's just not, there's not a lot of stuff out there to do a lot of research on these teams other than going to like summer practices and stuff like that. But being around the scene, you can have a general sense of what's going on. So we're going to go through, we'll start at 6A and they'll go down. Obviously 6A would probably be a bigger chunk than, 3A, 2A, 1A, but I would still just want to touch on them. I wanted to release rankings and give more than just a sentence of maybe why, an explanation of why I did the rankings. So that's going to be basically the point of this video. Before we get into it, My 7 on 7 was the first sponsor for Minnesota High School Football Network. So I want to thank My 7 on 7. They've been going and they've been a football business that's been really helping out a lot of the youth, and they've actually turned into more high school. They run high school leagues in the off season. There's a lot of kids. Football isn't just in the fall. My 7 on 7 makes it really a year-round sport, and they do a really good job. They got locations everywhere around the metro. So if you haven't heard of My 7 on 7, they're sponsoring the scoreboard post. So if you've seen the scoreboard post on Instagram, you may have seen them. I'd give them a search up. And this winter, definitely get into their leagues. Whether you're a player listening to this or you're a parent, those leagues really help out for development. I know when I played, because it was their first year, like sixth grade me was in the first ever like My 7 on 7 league.
Yeah.
And I had a blast. So
go
check them out.
I would second that. I've done consulting with them in the past and did some training with some of the quarterbacks, and I think they do a great job, and it's a great place for kids that want to compete at a high level. So I'd agree with that. So no question.
All right, let's get into it. I'm going to add to stage the power rankings, and I got to adjust the layout a little bit here as we go. But basically, we're going to start through 1 through 5, and we're going to kind of go down through in spurts of 5, and you're just going to I want you to comment on what you think. So 1 through 5, I got Minnetonka, Maple Grove, Shakopee, and then I think there's kind of a drop off after 3, in my opinion, and it can kind of get wonky, and you can kind of take it wherever. I took it to Wayzata, which maybe is a surprise to a lot of people, and the Spuds, who are actually a new addition to 6A. React to it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I looked at this when it first came out, when you released it, and I guess I don't think there's any question that Minnetonka, your top 3 are pretty legit. I don't think you're going to get a lot of argument there. I would say preseason wise, Minnetonka is definitely the favorite. They are loaded, I think.
Which sucks.
They didn't win it last year. I'm just saying.
Maple Grove is. If I was a Maple Grove fan, I'd be listening to this and be like, really? Because they beat them in state pretty handily. I was at the 7 on 7 tournament they did. Guess who won that? Maple Grove.
Sure.
So like Maple Grove has won these things, but I think you agree with me in that Minnetonka.
I would agree with that. I also think Shakopee, Shakopee is a solid team. Like their program, the way they run way they run offense. Their defense is always super sound. But definitely those top three. I think once you move past that, the Wayzata, Moorhead, Edina, I think Edina is a little, I think it's a little overrated in that spot.
Yeah.
I would, if I flip this around a little bit, and I'm going to come back to Moorhead, but I would Centennial, I would flip-flop Centennial and Edina. That would be my only flip-flop. I think Moorhead's in a good spot. Wayzata is, I think that
first I'm taking.
I think the Wayzata Andover game will tell us some things. I mean, that's an opening weekend game that's pretty, I think it'll be pretty telling for both teams. Not to get into super specifics, but Andover, and I mean, I'll let the audience know I was the Andover head football coach for 18 years, so I'm a little biased there. Yeah. But I would say, prior to 6A being created, Andover played all those schools. We played Edina, we played Eden Prairie, we played those schools, and I thought Anoka, we competed well against those schools for the size. So I'm anxious to see. I'm going to go to that game. I'm anxious to see that Wayzata Andover game. I think Andover will be better than people think. Joe Maps and their quarterback solid. So I do think, I do think that Moorhead is in a good spot. Their quarterback situation, Coach Feeney he's fantastic. Coached against him many times. So I think that first block of 5, I probably, I don't know about Wayzata. I mean, that could be a flip-flop in there too.
That was the one. Because apparently Wayzata, I heard that they didn't look very good at the scrimmages, which I don't want to overreact to scrimmages, especially from other people's perspective of it, because that taints your view of it. Because like Forest Lake didn't have Howie Johnson playing. They didn't have
Why would they? Right? Why would they play him?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to overreact, but there also is something that scrimmages do. They can also give you insight. I'm not saying that they're completely, garbage, but my Wayzata ranking, I wasn't going to let the scrimmages, even though it sounded like Centennial went up against them and did pretty well. They're also, Centennial's in a whole different section than them. And in the West, there's not really a lot of Centennial type offenses, especially with Shakopee leaving the section.
Right. No, I'd agree with that. I guess my perspective as a coach and as a former high school coach on the scrimmage, you can't always match philosophies with each team. You're not going to play Howie in that. Why would you play Howie? He doesn't need evaluation. Right. And there's some kids that are going to play more that, if people watch NFL football, liken it more to the preseason games, there's guys that play in the game that may not get a lot of playing time in a regular varsity game, but you need to evaluate them in this scrimmage to see where they're at. So scrimmages are kind of, and also, I mean, coaches have different philosophies on how much they want to show of their playbook too. Exactly. So when you start saying
you can't game plan as well.
Yeah. And you know what I think, and not to rip on defensive coaches, but I will, there's nothing to lose in a scrimmage. And so I always feel like defensive coaches run different blitzes that you're not going to see in a game because there's no score. So the defense is always typically going to look a little better than the offense. So I guess evaluating a scrimmage is somewhat fair, but not totally fair as far as what a game's going to look like,
Yeah. And it'd be one thing if I could get to it as well. I was up north recording a week 0 game and I was not able to get. Also, why does everybody do their scrimmages Saturday morning? I get it.
What's the first week you can have full live contact? So you got to, and a lot of teams, I know we talked with the high school league for a number of years that if we're going to start playing a game on Thursday, we should be able to do those scrimmages on a Friday.
Yeah.
Because that
I just selfishly don't want them all at the same time. So I can get out and see a little bit more of these teams because
you need a bigger crew.
The public doesn't have access to this or whatever.
That's true.
The top 5, we already kind of touched on a little bit of 6 from 10. What are your thoughts there? Forest Lake, I think the Starch are being ranked Forest Lake 5th, they just did a top 25, not class specific. Well, they had Forest Lake 5.
I'm always going to tip my hand. I'm always going to tip my hand in my own bias, but Brad Beeskow played for me. I think Brad is an excellent coach. His defensive coordinator, Adam Burtness, I think is solid, sound. He coached for me back in the day, played for me as well. So I'm going to lean on those guys. If I was going to flip-flop a team, when I was flip-flopping Centennial and Edina, from the 9-6 spot, I would probably slide Forest Lake up there in front of either Moorhead or Wayzata. I think Coach Biscow is sound. Like what they do, they don't make mistakes. Obviously, Howie is he's a game wrecker, but I think they're a little low, but you're not trying to be a homer, I guess. But
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing is,
Anoka's
solid. They obviously had a great year last year, but I would probably slide them down underneath Centennial. I think Centennial is solid. I think their run game and ability to control the clock makes them a type of team, like you said, that people don't see very often. So I'd probably slide a few things around. I'd love to fix this thing and then look at it, on Thanksgiving weekend and see how we did.
Yeah. Centennial, I think, only has up to go. At least, like, I put them at 9. Just 2 years ago they won state against Edina. Last year they kind of reload because they lose a lot of people, and then this year they that reload year. Now it's time to go. From what I saw in the scrimmage film, they looked really good as well. And they're also in that north, which I think with Maple Grove leaving, especially, it's anybody's. It's, Anoka graduated a lot of people. So I'm kind of taking a leap of faith on Anoka. I like their quarterback, Blake Sieben. I've got to see him throw. And Anoka obviously relies on their quarterback a lot. Some of these, you lose your quarterback and it's not that big of a deal because you hand the ball off 85% of the time anyways. Sure. Not the case with Anoka, but I think Centennial only has up to go at 9.
Well, I think the other piece too that is hard for the general public, just coming from a coach's standpoint, is, you look at good players leaving, and the one thing that people don't know is what do you have in that sophomore class, and sometimes in that freshman class that are moving up into their becoming juniors that you've never heard of, right? And sometimes they're like, well, that's such a surprise to the general public, but to the coach, it's like, no, this kid dominates in practice and had a great summer. So you're right. I think some of that's hard to account for, but those are things that we just don't know because you're not inside all of those programs. But I think that I don't disagree with what you're saying there. I think those are pretty fair assessment.
Yeah. So let's get to 11 through 15. And now I think even more, it kind of gets really open. And I think this is where a lot of rankings can vary if you're making them. I know Stillwater, Nick Kinsey left to go to Hoban in Ohio. Mm-hmm. He's on a really good team down there. But Stillwater, everything around the quarterback, I think in doing more research and looking at it, they got one of the best receivers in high school, and Zoller, he's a stud. Underrated, D-line, Andrew Olson, Ofoye. That's one of the top 2 D-lines in 6A, or just duos in 6A alone. The more I look at Stillwater, the more I like, and I heard they did pretty good in the scrimmages.
Sure. Yeah, and Coach LeBoer he's another solid coach, and I'm always going to lean toward, the talent that you have, but also the style of coaching and the history of those coaching staffs of how well they prepare their kids. So I can't argue with Stillwater. They're probably a team that, I'm guessing they're probably more of a top 10 team than we think, but on paper, I see where we're putting that right now. I think Mounds View is, if you're going to jump down just a little bit before we get back to Prior Lake, I think Mounds View is always one of those teams that overachieves in my world. They're a smaller enrollment school at 6A, always well coached, always have good athletes, always good special teams. So I think where they're at is fair, but I don't think we should be surprised if they end up being a Final 8 team. I think that's pretty fair as well.
Yeah. Prior Lake usually always 500, so it kind of fits that they're usually right in the middle. I feel like they have a lot better talent than what would usually you'd think of a 500 record, but it feels like time and time again they just hover around that 500 mark. So yeah,
they don't play an easy schedule either. So I think some of those, I always like to look at not just the record, but look at the score of the games. That they the 5 losses. I don't think you're ever looking at losses that are 28-7 or 35-10. You're talking about battling out games that are just the difference of having the ball at the end or getting a stop. So I think those are thin margins, and we all look at that when you're coaching and playing, how close you are in a few of those games for your record to be quite a bit different.
On that same point, Lakeville South is exactly one of those teams that you're talking about, that they maybe their record, shows up as they had a down season. Coach Lance is on my podcast. He's a Lakeville South coach. I was texting back and forth with him saying it, and he was like, he was telling me that he thinks they had a down year. And I was like, well, record-wise, yes, but you guys lost. Like, you got eliminated to Anoka by 1 point, and you took them to the brink. Also, like Lakeville North, which was one of the premier teams last year, they lost on a game-winning drive. So I think there's a lot of meat on the bone. They said they were down. I thought they were up, and that's kind of why I have them in the middle of the pack, because their quarterback, their top 30 running backs and receivers all left. I know they have stuff to replace, but the Lakeville South and North, I kind of.
Well, I'm rooting for. I know Coach Vossen down at North and Coach Burke at Lakeville South. I trained actually the quarterback Nick Leland at Lakeville South. I had him back when he was like a freshman, and just a tall, lanky kid, and he's just in a power T offense and whatever else. But he's a kid that can. I think I'm excited for that. I just had texted him yesterday, just saying, I think you guys have a shot to be a much better team. Like, if you're picking a dark horse team, to your point, like, I think I would not be surprised to see them in that Final Eight situation in US Bank Stadium, so I think they've got.
I feel like they're usually there, right? Except for
but you look at this board, and are there any of those teams in that top 10 to 15 where you're like, oh, I can't believe they're at US Bank? And that's, those are all solid football programs. There's no, program in there that's like a dark horse team,
Yeah. Eastridge through Hopkins. I know my last two in this room might get some turn. So let me explain a little bit. Eastridge, obviously, I think they're kind of this team sitting in the dark of this East section, kind of hanging around right behind Stillwater, Mountains View, and Forest Lake, kind of lurking to see what happens there. They got the quarterback to do it. Rosemount, I heard, is young. I'm pretty down on Eden Prairie. I know they're historically really good and stuff like that, but I think they're on the lower end, especially preseason wise. They got to prove it to me. And then Coon Rapids and Hopkins. Okay, I went to these summer scrimmages, and Coon Rapids kind of took Blaine to the woodshed in some scrimmages, and really Blaine's only time scoring was pretty much against Coon Rapids number twos. I was impressed with Coon Rapids. They have a really good quarterback, and they have two good receivers. Where I get nervous is Coon Rapids line. I feel like they always get some sort of dominated up front. Like they have a Maple Grove, Champlain Park's usually big, kind of stuff like that. And then Hopkins, I'm a big fan of Hopkins, especially in the playing in maroon. Like, if they were playing in the West, which nobody wants to play in, it would be a different story. But with them having a maroon schedule, I think they're going to have a pretty good record, especially compared to what they have been. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump in here and say you have Eden Prairie down about 8 spots too low. So I'm going to say, Mike Grant's had a little bit of a success over the years. And for him to have a preseason ranking outside that number is not common. They've got like 3 solid D1 players.
Gavin Walden, I know, is
in the trenches. In the trenches. They're solid up front, and their offensive line is good, and they don't make mistakes. I know they haven't won a state championship for a bit, but if we're talking about rankings, in my world, I'm guessing I'd probably slide them up inside the top 10. We're going to find out a lot because you put Anoka at number 7. And they play Anoka right out of the gate. So if I'm a betting man and we have to do, this is FanDuel, I'm sorry, I'm putting my money on Eden Prairie against Anoka, just based on history and everything else. But I think there's a little more talent down Eden Prairie. But I guess we'll find out, in a few days.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the West is so loaded that I think maybe I'm falling victim to it being so loaded to where I picture the season ending in Eden Prairie probably being like a 5 or 6 seed because they're in such a loaded conference. But that 5 to 6 seed is like one of the most dangerous in the past like years of
You are
being, and they're going to
correct.
play a
You
North
are
team.
correct.
They're going to play whatever, and they might surprise somebody.
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. And, it's also a war of attrition when you're playing a schedule like that. Football is a game of staying healthy. If your backup was as good as your starter, you'd be playing, So sometimes you can get thin in some spots that people don't recognize. People recognize when a stud wide receiver standing on the sideline, but they don't always know who the right guard is.
Exactly.
I've lost more games over the years missing an offensive lineman than I did missing a perimeter player. So I think that's something to be said for depth on that as well.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
No, I guess, I know Hopkins has speed on the perimeter. They always struggle in the trenches. Same with Coon Rapids. I think, you talked about Blaine, getting kind of beat that way, but the game is played with 11 guys on the field, not 6 So I don't know. I guess if we're going to start looking at that,
it was
bottom
11
thing,
on 11. Just saying, it was in sevens.
You're talking about the scrimmage. Yeah, I guess it's one of
Yeah.
those things where you're just saying, well, I guess it's different when it's it's game time and the regular season. But I guess I probably, there's a couple teams on the bottom I'd probably slide up there. I guess, but again, these matchups, you start looking at the first game matchups with some of those teams on the bottom end. The Centennial Rosemont game, that will tell you something. I think again, Rosemont is traditionally ton of respect for that program. They've typically been, sound every year. They play in a really tough schedule, obviously. So again, we can't look at just overall record all the time. I know that matters, but it matters more when you see teams getting beat 28-7, 35-7, whatever.
Right.
But it's 14-7, 21-14. That, I know it's a loss, but those are quality games and they're right there. But I think that Centennial, I'm really intrigued by that Centennial Rosemont game right out of the gate. Just like as intriguing as the Eden Prairie Anoka game is. So when you look at your chart and you see this cross from top to bottom, I do think that that's going to be something. The other one that I think we're, just looking at this as new teams to 6A, but the Rogers Moorhead game. Those guys, they're both 6A schools, but those teams they're power teams. They're teams that have traditionally been good at 5A, and those are teams that have played Elk River right to the end every single time. And Elk River is a team that if you put them in the 6A chart, where would you put them?
Oh man, that is tough.
I know where I'd put them. If I had this chart and I had to put them in 6A, they'd at least be where Wayzata is.
Oh yeah. It's just a matter of they would fall into the Minnetonka Maple Grove tier, and I think they would. Yeah. Shakopee's on very close, but their offense kind of scares me.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like, at 6A, there's haves and have-nots. There's no question. There's big fall-offs in enrollment, and football's a numbers game. That's just how it is. Typically, you see the schools with the larger enrollments are successful, and that's because you got numbers. You look at a school like, I looked at the enrollments today, and Minnetonka is 3,300. Eden Prairie is 2,600. So there's a big change, and Eden Prairie's enrollment has dropped off, and maybe that has something to do with that. So when you look at schools like Mounds View and Andover, and some of the schools, they're at the bottom end of, there's a big difference. So anyway, I think all that matters just for the depth factor mostly.
Yeah. And then the bottom 5, I know some Blaine guys are mad at me. The thing is, you have only one way up. You're losing. I mean, Sam Shaughnessy was like basically just as Force Lake. He was their whole team because he's a stud. And Blaine just completely took Force Lake out of the playoffs with no question. So I feel a little bad putting Blaine that low. But when you get that low, it's kind of, here, there. You can kind of slide it. You can make a case for anybody to be, in that tier. So
Yeah. I mean, and then, Blaine, they don't have the easiest opening game, but, there's a chance for them to show out right out of the gate. I mean, that's kind of where you're at, with respect to, seeing, because you have new players. Sometimes you're putting kids out there the first time under the big lights. You've got a junior starter at quarterback or linebackers. Like when the lights come on at 7:00, your first time, sometimes people, they're up to the task, and sometimes the lights are too big for them. Whether they're talented or not. There's a big difference between a Wednesday night 7-on-7 league or a scrimmage on a Saturday morning. When it matters and the band is playing and the stadium's got 5,000 people, sometimes it matters, so.
Yeah, it does. SDMA, I feel bad. They're even more in the Eden Prairie situation where it's just like, I'm terribly sorry for what you guys have to endure this regular season. Champlain Park, I think, has, I remember Champlain Park growing up always being good. I feel like they've kind of been in this, near 500 rut again for the past few years. And then I heard Farmington's installing some sort of new offense down there that involves 2 quarterbacks possibly. I know they didn't scrimmage anybody because they want to hide stuff. I asked Coach Compton, who is, with Augsburg with us, and he said that they weren't scrimmaging anybody, that they were holding on to a surprise for week 1, wherever it is.
Well, I mean, it's 1 week of surprise, man. Come on. After that, what are you going to do? Everybody's going to see it. I want to go back to Champlain because I do feel like Champlin's maybe a little bit low. I mean, putting Champlain behind Coon Rapids and Hopkins is, Caleb, that's a little disrespectful in my world. I think Champlin's pretty good. I think Champlain got hurt. They had some suspensions last year that hurt their record, hurt their seeding. I think they're a solid football program. I talked to a couple of their coaches today. They're pretty excited. As much as I would bump EP up into that, at least that second tier, I would slide Champlain up into that probably Prior Lake area. I think they're probably 8 spots up. But, again, a lot of that is going to come out. They play STMA, I think, first. I think they'll win that game. I don't know what it's going to be like score-wise, but I think they're talented at quarterback. I think their defense is sound, and I'm excited to see some of these scores.
And I think people have said like the North is weak or whatever just because Maple Grove's leaving, but like Anoka, Centennial, and I know I have Champlain low, but Champlain I feel like is always better than what their record is. They're usually a good program. I know I have them low, but and Andover as well in that mix, and Rogers as well. I think it could be interesting in the North as well.
Yeah, week 1 will be a good reveal for some of this. I think, when we come back next week after we see these scores, we're going to have a much better idea analyzing the offense and defensive efficiency of these teams, because the matchups, I think, are pretty telling in terms of especially your top teams, and I think that's going to be a important part to giving us an idea of where these rankings actually have some truth to them, or see if I'm right. I still think Eden Prairie is going to finish up there, and I just like I think Centennial's better than Edina, and whatever. So I think we'll see. We'll see. I'm gonna go through these tonight. I was analyzing them after we talk, and I want to go through and move my chart around and see where they're at after week 1 and see how we did.
I like it.
Yeah,
let's do it. Anything more on 6A, or should we move to 5?
Yeah, let's get some 5 up there and see what they got going. It'll take us 1 minute. Let's just talk about Elk River and call it good.
All right, so kind of the same story. Elk River and Chanhassen are kind of in that Minnetonka Maple Grove tier. Where I was trying to explain to somebody, I think in my world, I can expect them to win it. Like I can expect 2 teams to win the championship, just because I feel like that's probably like their goals. Like, and I know everybody wants to be there, but I truly feel the expectations for Elk River and Chanhassen are like, we need to win the championship, and if we don't, the season's kind of a bust. And I think those guys are in the championship tier, and I think it drops off at Mankato East, Mayo, and Minnetonka. I all like.
I wish I could battle you more on this ideologically. We can talk about, all the other teams, but it's going to be Elk Storm in that final. I'd be shocked unless there's some type of injury situation or some other extenuating circumstances where there's players not playing for some reason. I think the other teams falling in behind, they're all solid programs, and Cretan's on its way up. I think they're St. Thomas Academy is always sound. Mankato West always sound. Owatonna is maybe one of the best coached 5A teams in the state every year. So it's just tough. A lot of people would argue like Elk River, looking at their enrollment and stuff there. I know they're under the line, but man, they could easily opt up for bunches of years.
I heard there's a rumor that they could have that they were rumored to go up. That was one of the things I hear. I was excited because I was like, oh, that's gonna be sweet to see what that's gonna look like. But it ended up not happening.
Yeah, it's just hard. I think it's the schedule is going to be easy to them, for the most part. It's not like they're playing any of these top 5 teams. So it makes it less likely that you're going to have even injuries. I mean, they had so many running clock games last year, so it's not like you're getting hurt.
It was just Andover. It was basically
but I will say that, Andover and Rogers, and Moorhead. Mm-hmm. But I would say, I have all the respect in the world for Coach Hamilton. I've known him for a long time. We battled it out year after year when I was coaching. He does a really good job and built that program into something special. And I just think if I'm going to give just hard football opinion, if I'm Coach Hamilton, I guess how many 5A football titles do you want to win before you want to be king of the hill of the state of Minnesota? Honestly, if you've got a good football team and a sound football team, then
they would make noise like we talked about. If they
there's no doubt.
There's
no doubt, and you'd say the North is weak. Well, and I'll say this too, and this is something that bothered me when I was coaching when we were at the 5A level is, and we play Elk River and teams 6A schools, the bigger 6A schools would be like, how come you can't stop that offense? They're mocking it like there's some, we're not good coaches at the 5A level because Coach Hamilton's running up 5. Well, then let's play it. Go play them. And that was the case. That's why Lakeville South won this thing, running that same off. Where do you think they got the offense? So I get a lot of respect for Coach Hamilton and what he does there. And, it's really sound. So, I wish they would have opted up only to prove a point of how talented I'm just saying, no doubt, so I think that should have been something that they considered and said, we've dominated 5A football. Let's go see what we can do with the 6A guys. And, I definitely think they're right out of the gate. You'd have to put them in the top 5 without a doubt. So, and I've seen some other polls of some other websites that had them when they do the overall polling and they take away classification. Couple polls had them as number 1. Which is a little bit of a stretch for me, but I don't know. So
who knows? Mayo, I like they're coming up. Usually when they see those teams, go down, we have the Moorhead jumping into the top 5, and then Mayo, kind of a middle of the package team. They beat Centennial in the playoffs last season. Yeah. I think they're gonna make some noise in 5A.
I heard their offense coordinator is pretty good. Your old teammate.
Yeah.
I heard
it's going to be fun to see. It's going to be
I want to see that too. I told him I was going to try to see Mayo play because I want to see,
the only Mayo game I went to, he was in the box, or I guess I got to 2, but I went to 1, and it was a lightning delay, and they ended up moving the game to the next day. And Rochester's not close to me, so
nope.
I drove 2.5 hours, and it's you gotta be kidding me. But I at least got to see him at least late in the season.
Yeah.
So.
Mother Nature always wins, man. No, I'm gonna try to catch a Mayo game at some point this year, just to give some respect out to our old Augsburg quarterback, Cade Sheehan. So I'm excited to see him do that. Like I said, you can go into that second tier. There's good football teams in there, but again, they're all playing for consolation prizes as long as Elk River's doing what it does. I think Chan's got a chance to to give them a run. They've got a talented, well coached football team. I know that as well. So I think it's, it'll be interesting. And again, what is it going to come down to by that time of the season? It's going to come down to, are you healthy? How healthy are you? Because if Elk River's on quarterback number 3, that's a little different, because their quarterback runs the ball a lot and he's a key part of that. So, we'll see on that one.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned Creighton. I'm a Creighton believer. I think they got some good stuff going on for sure. Also, STA is always real good as well. Could possibly we see them, make some noise. I think Creighton plays Elk River week 8. I think that's going to be a really fun game to watch, especially we're going to know if Creighton's legit by then as well. So that'll be fun. Robbinsdale, I think they got both Robbinsdales. Cooper's got some really good athletes.
Oh, yeah.
A really good quarterback. I know Armstrong, they have 2 of the best backers in 5A to pair along with. They got a really good defense, but it's just, man, that it's a steep hill to climb is what we're saying. I think really after the top 3, it really, maybe Chaska, Waconia, those guys are in a tough section and they beat up on each other a lot. So their records, like we talked about, aren't going to show how good they are. But usually they got to play Mankato West, Mankato East. They got to play each other. I think Chanhassen's in there as well.
I mean, we can kind of summarize it like this, Caleb. All those teams that are in the top roughly 15 of what you have there are going to have good seasons. They're all going to be above. They're going to have good. It's just the difference of, we're talking about who's going to win the whole thing. I mean, almost probably the 10 top teams in there are all going to have really good records. They're going to be, 6-2, 5-3, 6-2, 5-3. They're having good seasons. It's just that when they get to that bottom of that bracket, those are going to be the 4 teams, the 2 teams at the end. Now the question is, who is Elk River and Chan going to play in the semifinals? That's the other question. Is it going to be Mayo? Is it going to be Alexandria? Is it going to be St. Thomas? Who is it going to be, right? And we're saying that they're going to win those games, but somebody's trying to get there and knock them off. I think we're anointing this, but at the same time, I think, let's come back next week when we look at the first week scores of these teams, and let's start looking at who maybe are the teams that are going to get into that final 8 and then final 4, and see who's going to, give them a run at that point.
Yeah, I like that. Let's move on. Let's move on to 4A.
Sure.
This is a little bit of you got some roots in 4A.
A little bit.
Oh, that's it. Oh, see, I'm still learning. Holy Family is 3A.
No, they're 3A.
4A,
yeah,
right?
I was going to say, you're
exactly.
a little ahead of me.
Yep. Yeah. So Becker,
4A.
Stewartville, and Fergus Falls, those 2 of those teams came up from 3A and were really good programs in 3A. So really looking forward to see, especially I'm going to Stewartville's game week 1 against Benilde. I think that's going to be a really good game. Excited to get to see that. But what do you think? What do you think of 4A in general?
Well, I will tell you, I had a picture pop up on my stream in my photo file today of me with Dwight Lundeen. And, Coach Lundeen at Becker is one of my all-time favorites. I know he's been coaching for, almost as long as I've been alive. And I have all the respect for him and what he does and, all that kind of stuff. But what they do out in Becker and how they do it is really impressive. I hate to anoint a state champion before a game is played, but I know they are talented and they are so well coached. It'll be interesting. I think you start looking at, teams from the Metro. We always start in the Metro and don't give those outstate teams, I think, as much credit as they deserve. I think those teams out there probably sometimes have more depth. I think sometimes in the Metro, you're looking at a school like Totino Grace, who, again, well-coached team, good history. They've dropped down from 6A all the way to 4A. But, again, they've got
They
transfers.
graduated
You're
a
talking
ton of
about
people.
they did, but I'm also saying like you
They're
refill there
upfront.
a different way than
Yeah.
other programs do. Same with
Uh-huh.
Benilde, so I think that's different. So there's some wild cards in there that I think really matter. You have Byron in there. I'm
Yep.
trying to see again, I watched a preview on them the other day. Man, they look really good quarterback and really nice looking offensive defensive line setup. So, it's hard. I think this is a chart that's probably even more important for us to see the week 1 scores.
Becker
so
and
you get
Arno play.
and that's a
week
huge
1.
one, right out of the gate. I mean, that's again state final matchup potentially. So I think when you look at that, I think we'll know a lot more. I mean, if Becker comes out and beats Orno, 28 rock or 35-7, now all of a sudden you're thinking, man, this is a whole different game, as far as like how good they really are. So we'll know more. We'll know a lot more. I do think as we work down the class levels, because I like to talk about attrition because I think it's so important. These teams, when you start getting to this level, every level you go down, you have more two-way players.
Mm-hmm.
And so one injury is 2 positions. So if your quarterback goes down, he might be your free safety. If your running back goes down, he might be your Mike linebacker. So, that's where it becomes a little more catastrophic with depth as you go down. So you can be having a pretty darn good season, and all of a sudden it's like, you're thin. So
yeah. This Stewartville, I know it's just such an interesting because they blew out. It's kind of like the Elk River, basically, but like Elk River actually moving up. Stewartville, I wanted them to move up. I wasn't sure it's going to happen, and then they actually did. Yeah. And they got to go. Like, it's not like 4A was open before they come because Becker's such like a powerhouse in it.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's an Elk River experiment with Stewartville that we get to see play out.
I'm impressed by that. Like, I think that's a good thing. It's like you can sit here and say, just like I know Coach Hamilton, so if he's listening, all the respect in the world, but I'm just like, how many 5A titles do you want to win before you say, let's move up to 6A and really be the king of Minnesota? Because, rankings are one thing, but you can only prove it on the field. So I would love of all the years, I think this is such a good year for them to have done that. But anyway, we're repeating ourselves on that. So
that's okay. Martin Slane, I know, a really good running back for Hermantown that I think is going to have a big year in Hermantown. I think it's going to make some noise as well. Princeton always really run heavy over there. They like to pound the rock. Corey's always usually, there.
Corey's got,
I think they've
got one of the better players they've got one of the better players in the state of Minnesota. So, when you have a player like that playing at the 4A level, when you talk about game changer, I mean, that's the real game changer. Because the size and speed factor that you run into at the 4A level is a lot different than 6A. And so I think that those are things that
quarterback returning for their second year as well. It's going to help. It'll be interesting to see what goes on over there. Hutch, I know, has been, very relevant in the high school football scene. Kind of got them, around the middle of the pack. But I definitely think there's, some teams lower that could possibly jump up, but I don't think any of those teams are necessarily going to jump up. I'm interested to see Benilde. I know Peyton Myers didn't get to. I'm pretty sure he didn't play like a ton because of an injury last season. I know he's one of the better quarterbacks, in his class. And they go up against Stewartville. Like I said, I'm going to be there. That's one of the week 1 matchups that I can't.
I think like I said, I know I'm repeating myself, but I do think, we're prognosticating on best information, but I do think that a week from now, we'll have a better idea on that. To go back to just for a second, you're talking about, Corey's situation. I mean, the offensive lineman, Andrew Trout, like he's a gopher recruit. Like I don't know. I've never had a player like that in my program. I coached for, 30 some years. I've never had a player that looked like that, play like that. So having a guy like that at the 4A level, I don't know how, no disrespect to the other schools, but there is a differential there that is really going to be huge. So he's not a one-way player, so I'm sure he's a wrecking ball on the defensive side too, not just an offensive lineman. So I think, all that matters. And I'm guessing when they run the football, there's a direction that they run it most of the time. So
it's unique. Well, it was unique because Benilde had, like a dude that was a Power 5 dude that was getting recruited by basically everybody. And I know he went to Arizona, but there's not a lot. There's not a lot of times where, that 2 stud tackles like that fall into the same class, especially.
That's crazy. So, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. No doubt.
Let's get into 3A, and then 3A. Here we go. Let's get into 3A top 25. We'll kind of hit these, last 3 pretty quick. But Annandale, they didn't have their starting quarterback. He was out all of last year. So that's kind of, I keep on saying it's a leap of faith, or, it's a preseason ranking. I'm kind of, it's my guesstimate of what's going on. So I think with the return, they have Isaiah Wright, who's also a really good running back as well. Probably one of the best running backs in this class for sure. But I feel like this one, especially with Stewartville leaving and Fergus Falls leaving, 2 really good teams, I could really see this is like wide open in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, Annandale, obviously the favorite, just in the success they've had over the last few years. I'll give a shout out again to one of my former captains at Andover. That's their offensive line coach, Alex Becker. He's been there for a while. They do a great job down there, and they have had some athletes that, obviously at that level make them, more of a powerhouse. There's no doubt, and being well coached matters. To your point, like between the Albany, Fairmont, Waseca, you get into that realm of schools that are always typically successful. I always lean to solid veteran coaching. Those are the teams that have systems in place that allow them to control the football and stop people on defense and not make mistakes on special teams. So I do think your Annandale pick is probably a pretty sound start to it. And then, Dassel Coquette, same thing. DC is always a solid team, and they make their way to section finals as well. Looking in that second tier, I guess if you're going to start messing around with things, I'd probably, with the Holy Family and Dilworth, Glen, and Felton School, those are 2 teams that might be they could be replacements up in that 4 or 5 area. Only because of what they have returning. Holy Family has, I think, obviously I'm biased because I'm going to tell everybody my son is the head football coach at Holy Family. So, but I'll pick on him if it's not going right. So, but they have a fantastic quarterback situation there, and team speed is really good. And I think they're a team that maybe 7 is a good place for them to start, but they're sound. I think it's hard with teams like Pequot Lakes. I think you have you can only base it on what they have coming back. But again, you don't get those crossover games to see, how good a team is. And sometimes they play in a section that isn't super strong, and they get to, they just don't get tested. So, and I don't want to take anything away from them because winning is winning, but sometimes you just don't have that opportunity to get a more quality win against another team than during the regular season.
Yeah. It's Holy Family. It's tough. So when you make preseason rankings, you go through their last season, and you start to, see who's still on that team and whatever. And I find it really difficult when a team does get eliminated by the state champion. You kind of got to take it with a grain of salt of being like, all right, so Holy Family was really good, and the reason they got out of the playoffs is because of Stewartville. And Stewartville killed everybody. So it's like, what if Stewartville wasn't there? Would last year look different for them? And maybe they don't, get out in the round that they are. So I think it's one of, you talked about it. They could be higher, especially with Stewartville eliminating them. Who knows what would have happened if, they could have met Stewartville in the championship, and you're going like, oh, that was a better team.
I mean, they open up, Holy Family opens up at New London Spicer, who, again, typically year in, year out, solid football program. They have a tougher schedule, I think, than they've had, that Wright County Conference. So, again, I'm going to repeat myself. Like we can throw these out there, but we'll know a lot more next week. Obviously not the whole story, but we'll know a lot more. I do, when you look at different programs and their traditional success, like what makes teams traditionally successful. Like I look at number 15, Minneapolis North, and, all the teams that they're playing are pretty much outstate schools, when you're looking at in terms of this ranking, right?
Yeah.
But Coach Adams is unique. He's successful for a reason. They're athletic down there. They run a sound program too. So it's interesting. Like those games are going to be fun to see the scores. I'm excited for Thursday and Friday to see some of these outcomes and start doing note taking for our next week's show, because I think we'll have a lot more data to go on where we can pick on some schools for laying an egg, and there'll be some schools out there like, wow, they're way better than we thought, right?
Yeah. I think Camden has a potential. I got to go out to one of their 7-on-7s. They got talent, and they have one of the best defensive and offensive linemen, maybe not in this class, but in the state. Dude is really good both sides of the ball, like you're talking about when you get to this level. A lot of the dudes play both sides of the ball, and I think you said a wrecking ball, basically. Whatever team he's playing, when you have such a dominant D lineman, especially the lower you go, it's going to make more of an impact on the game,
right?
And you can single-handedly wreck games in that sense. I think,
there's definitely no doubt about that. I mean, I think you look at just like I was saying, with respect to Ricori, when you have a legitimate D1 kid playing at the 4A level, like, and I think even more so when they're a lineman, they can cause so much more damage. And so I think that, the lower you go where you have a kid that is let's get really weird here and talk about Jackson County Central. They have number one ranked player in the state, Roman Voss. Like, so you put a kid like that on the field, and how is that gonna, you know what I mean? Like, how does that even work? You see, it's like watching,
and he didn't even play the state game they won.
That's what I'm saying. Like, injured. So you look at, like, you watch some kid that's playing, this Saturday, you'll see some kid, it's a freshman, and he's out there, rushes for like 200 yards. Like, what did that kid do a year ago as a high school kid? I mean, it's just run over high school kids, So right. I think all of that stuff comes into play, right? I mean, it's a weird thing to think about, but I think all I'm trying to point out is maybe the obvious, that the lower you go in the class and the higher ranking a kid is as a D1 player, just the more domination I think that takes place, and they're almost impossible to scheme against. Like I said, as a head coach forever, I've come up with some great game plans, but I've rarely out schemed genetics. It's just that is what it is. So that's
in high school.
Yeah, it's pretty tough sometimes. So no doubt.
Yeah. Well, we got to 2A, like you said, Jackson County Central. I think there not a lot of talk needs to be said about them, or state title winners, returning one of the best players that didn't even help them win that championship game in the state title. Kimball, Staples Motley, Barnesville, I like, Goodhue, Pierce Peterson's also.
What about Triton? Triton,
dude, yeah.
Dude.
Number 10.
Another freaky
command.
Dude. Yeah. Yep. And connection here. So just so you know, so when you start looking through this, you're like, how does that kid end up at Penn State? So Andy Kotelnicki is from Northfield, Minnesota. He's the offensive coordinator for Penn State. So that you get these connections here in Minnesota.
Gotcha.
So my favorite story, can I give you a side story? Side story.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So 2005, Andy Kotelnicki is coaching football at River Falls, UW River Falls. And they were running split back veer, triple option, wishbone. That's what River Falls ran back in the day. And he wanted to transition to running zone run game. And my high school team was one of the only teams in this area at that time that was running inside outside zone. So he came and sat in my room for a couple of days and had me draw up how to block inside outside zone. Well, the rest is history. I mean, this dude went on to, you know, he now he's made a couple $1 million as the Penn State offense coordinator. But I'll say this: if he's not going to watch this show, probably, but I will say, Andy. One of the things I love about Andy is I can send him a message and he responds back like he knows where he came from, you know. And I didn't do anything,
That's
but
cool.
At least I feel like I got him a little start, you know, to run in zone and stuff. But he's one of the best offense coordinators in the country, and that's really cool. But that's when I saw the commit on
Penn
him,
State,
I'm like, well,
I
see
one
that
ranked by a lot.
Yep, I see that one, that connection there for that young man, obviously with Andy being from Northfield, Minnesota. So there you go.
Yeah, Class 1A. Could we just say Minnesota and move on? I mean, they just freaking killed everybody. It was a Minnesota path that they just blazed through, and man,
well, I think one of the things on this. I think one of the things on this cast is to we can go ahead and agree that Minnesota is going to win it, just like we can say Elk River is going to win it or whomever. But let's start focusing on who the Final Four is going to be. Who are they going to play in the semis at some point? Who are they going to play in the quarterfinals? You know, like let's focus on who are the teams in this group that can find their way, you know, into the Final Four.
MIB is an interesting one. They came like I feel the 9-player to jump up to 1A is like way different than, you know, because you're obviously going from 9 players to, you know,
I don't
11,
even know how I don't even know how the scheme works in that. So yeah,
exactly. So MIB was a 9-man team, a really good 9-man team that's coming up to 1A. It's really hard to rank them, right? Because you have no idea what's going to happen when they hop up to 1A. But you know, Nevis has been always good, bold. Really good last season. Springfield is one of the best quarterbacks in state. I think Springfield was the one that challenged Minnesota probably the most last season. And they're returning, you know, their quarterback. They got some returners going on. So I feel like that's a very strong candidate as well.
So here's shout out to Bold. This is for everybody out there. Caleb Casa runs this show, and I'm going to quiz him on what Bold stands for.
I had no idea.
Dang. Bird Island.
Dude.
Olivia. No. Danube. There you go. Bird Island.
Hey,
Olivia.
I'll make that,
Danube.
I'll put it on a flashcard.
There you go. The only reason I know that is I've driven through those towns because when my son Connor, who's at Holy Family, was playing at Southwest State down in Marshall, you have to drive through those towns, and I only know that from there, but I see it every single time I think about it. So
I recognize a lot of these towns from driving through. Non-player. Fertile went down. I was there at that game. They shouldn't be my one, but I had to respect them and put up for what they had last season.
Sure.
Stephen Argyle kind of took them to town. I think Hills Beaver Creek turned in quarterback and one of the best defensive back and receivers. And 9-player Kingsland, Kaleem Ryland at the quarterback. One of the best athletes. He's going to UMD as a running back. Border West is nothing to sneeze about. Leroy Ostrander. There's a ton of 9-player programs that are really good.
Absolutely, man. I don't be judging kids based on their classification they're playing, and you know they're good players. And I think now you get to see so many more kids in the off season at camps and 7-on-7 where you're not just judging them saying, well, they're not that they dominate at that level, they wouldn't be good at a higher level. That's not it. We've seen that in all the time here in Minnesota.
Yeah, for sure. So that's going to be interesting to follow along with. Like you said, after week 1, it's going to be way easier to kind of sort out, you know, who's going to be in what tier. But even in week 1, sometimes, you know, teams often get better as the season goes on. Obviously, you've been a coach for a lot of years, so you should know that. But yeah, I mean, that was fun. Thank you. I appreciate all the insights and the stuff. I hope the viewers had a good time listening to us kind of talk about getting through every class. Like you said, no one class is better than the other.
No,
so we like
they're all great. High school football in Minnesota is fantastic. There's so many good coaches and players out there and programs that it's hard to get to every single one. But I do think next week's show will be fun because we'll actually be able to critique some matchups and have a better idea where schools are for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
You bet.
And thank you guys for watching.